Hi, I'm Brian Russell. I'm the author of Centering Prayer. Sitting quietly in God's presence can change your life. And what you're listening to is the teaching portion of the Centering Prayer gathering that I co-host each month with my friend and colleague and fellow Centering Prayer author, Rich Lewis. Rich wrote the book Sitting with God. In today's conversation, Rich and I go back and forth reflecting on how to anchor our soul in God. This is the reflection that we do in advance of a 20-minute centering prayer sit and then the Q&A and reflection time that we do at the end. If you'd like to be invited to future centering prayer gatherings, which we host on Saturdays once a month, you can sign up either at centeringprayerbook.com, that's my site, or at Rich's site, silenceteaches.com. You can check the notes for both of those links. And let's go to our reflection time. So Rich, why don't you get started with the topic? And I know you were going to share from one of your really good blog posts that you wrote.
Sure. And I'll read a quote. It's from, and I may have mentioned, I think I may have even quoted from his book last week, but Amos Smith has a book that he had a book that came out in November called Holistic Mysticism, The Integrated Spiritual Path of the Quakers. So kind of this quote kind of prompted our topic for today. So the quote is, with our souls anchored in the divine, we will find deep, unshakable security. Toughness and tenacity will be ours. So I just kind of love that quote from his book. So I'll reflect on it for a minute or two, and then let Brian kind of reflect on it. But it made me think about, well, how do you anchor your soul in the divine? And obviously, everybody has their own way of doing that, and how as I look back right now and what it looks like for me, and maybe in a couple of years it'll look different, but for me, how do I anchor my soul in the divine is, I begin my day with a silent sit before I do anything, no matter what day it is. And I think of that's my time to open to the presence and actions of God within, and that God will pray in me what I need, even just for that day. And then throughout the day, I might take a small pause just to reconnect and recharge with God. I'll also read some scripture. I have kind of maybe you'll have a go-to verse. If I feel like I'm weakening, so to speak, I'll recite, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. If I feel that something is happening within me that I don't feel strong. So I'll recite that to myself throughout the day when I feel it's necessary. And then I take a second sit. So I use, for me, my second sit is in the afternoon. It used to be when I first started in the evening, but I moved it earlier. So to keep my interior reservoir running, I'll take a second sit, a second centering prayer sit. And then I like to end the day strongly before I go to bed with gratitude, and just look back and reconnect with God, and reflect on the small, medium, and large things on the day. So, and then I like to think of it, I go to bed and rest in God. So that's, as I think about my day, that's kind of how I at least remain, anchored anchor my soul in the divine, is through centering prayer, through reciting scripture, through taking a small pause, and even through taking a second longer sit, and then through ending the day in gratitude. As I look back at a day, these are some things I do to keep my soul anchored in the divine. So I'll turn it over to you, Brian.
Yeah, thank you, Rich. Yeah, and I want to start with a statement and then give a metaphor, and then my second share today is going to be a little bit from the scriptures. I think there's a temptation in our world to prefer ecstatic spiritual states over learning to live out embodied spiritual traits. And what I mean by that, because we all, enjoy kind of a mountaintop experience, and I've had some, and even in the midst of centering prayer, sometimes we have even though we're not supposed to, we'll evaluate like, oh wow, I really got deep or something, and I had this union experience or whatever. But that ultimately is the point, because I think the temptation can be in our spiritual lives to look for like a magic bullet, or even an elevator. I jump in an elevator and I get blasted to the top of the Empire State Building. Well, the problem with that would be, number one, if the elevator doesn't work, you're not going anywhere. And also, elevators can fail from time to time, and God forbid you're in the elevator when it fails and you just come crashing right back down all those stories. You get blasted at the top and you just fall right back down. A lot of times, that's how many of us live our spiritual lives. It's just one high, then a valley, then a high, then a valley, and a high, then a valley. When we're talking about union with God, we're actually talking about not so much being in the middle, but it's a thing without these extreme bumps up and down. And the metaphor I do, instead of wanting to be like blasted into union with God, is what we want to think about. And Rich already hinted at this with his personal testimony, is instead of thinking I want to be on an elevator, imagine that the spiritual life is really a spiraling staircase. And when you're going up the stairs, what happens if you slip? Well, it hurts, but hopefully if it's a spiral staircase, you're just going to roll down a few stairs. And then, assuming you're not hurt, what do? You get back up and you start walking again, right? You're never going to fall all the way down the stairs. There's no, like literally, if you walked up the Empire State Building and even if you slipped, you're not falling down 100 stories. And I think that's the metaphor that we want to get. If we want to maintain union with God, we have to transfer our thinking from thinking that there's a button I push that blasts me into God's presence, and instead recognize that it's a way of life. It's a way of being. It's a container. The classic statement would be it's a rule of life. It's a series of practices where we open ourselves up to God's grace consistently. And then you get that experience of small things done consistently over time yields extraordinary results. We avail ourselves to the simple means of grace. As Rich said, just since we're talking about centering prayer in this call, you sit in silence. You show up, whether you want to or not. If you want to go deep, and I will testify to the power of the double 2 sits a day when I actually do that discipline, and I've been back on that recently. I'm always good for once a day, but I have been experiencing the twice a day the last several weeks now, and there's a huge difference on consistent practice on that. And so that would be that's going to be the end of my first part of my share. But trade in the desire for ecstatic spiritual states for the deeper desire to live out embodied spiritual traits. Build a spiral staircase. Don't just look for the elevator ride. Rich.
Okay. Then I thought I'd share like what are other things I do? Like that's kind of what I do throughout the day, but then what are other practices that I can do to continue to anchor my soul in the divine? As I said, centering prayer is my mainstay, but I do other things. So I like the combination of centering prayer with journaling and affirmations and visualization, and I'll share what I mean by that. Like sometimes before my centering prayer practice, or most times actually, particularly in the morning, I'll visualize interiorly. I kind of hand it over to God and say, this is what I'd like the day to look like. And I sort of visualize outcomes I want. Or if I know I work from home, my job's remote. And if I have 1 or 2 things I'm working on that maybe are harder than others, I kind of visualize the outcome or how I'm going to solve them. But I'll visualize how the day will go, whether it's work related or family related or personal related, and then just kind of let it go to God. So that's one thing I've been doing I don't do it during centering prayer, but I like to do it right before centering prayer, right? I literally just, with my eyes closed, I'm visualizing what the day will look like. And then I let it go to God. And I find that, very helpful for me, at least. And then journaling, I like to do journaling, outside of centering prayer. I like to think during centering prayer, God's praying in me. And then journaling is me writing what actions I think God has prayed in me. And you can have fun with journaling. Sometimes my journaling is just, I'll write a word, whatever words come to mind. Sometimes it could be a couple words. Sometimes it could be a phrase. Sometimes it could be a sentence. And it's really anything I want to. There's no right or wrong way to journal, as far as I'm concerned. It could be if I'm angry, I'll write. Might write things that make me angry, but I like to think of the journaling as it's what has God prayed in me during centering prayer, and that's kind of how I like to use journaling. And then I kind of use it, and I mentioned affirmations as well. I like to think of it too as what has God, what things or actions does God want me to take, and I can kind of turn them into affirmations. And I'll write, I'm so happy and grateful now that, and then I'll write what it is I want to accomplish. Um, and actually, what I also do, I mentioned I visualize before centering prayer. I'll read God my affirmations because I like to think of it as we're partnering together. So I want to make sure it's not just what do I want, it's I'm going to give this to you, God. I'm going to give this visualization to you. I'm going to give these affirmations to you, and let them brew with you as well, so that I can make sure that God and I are partnering on them. So I use affirmations in that manner as well. Um, so that's all. I thought I would just share. Centering prayer is my mainstay, but I love the idea of affirmations. I love the idea of visualization, and I love the idea of journaling outside of centering prayer. And these are all different ways that definitely continue to anchor me in God. Let me come back to what the quote was, but anchor my soul in the divine. These are all different practices that continuously reconnect me or keep me connected to God. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, and we're going to go into the centering prayer after I do my second share here. Yeah, and let me give a practical example for myself, just to build on things that Rich has already said. If we want to stay anchored, um, and I love Rich has made this real practical. He's actually shared the specific things that he does. So here's the question that I would have in the challenge that I have for everybody listening on the call. Daily, commit to your core practice and your one thing. And what do I mean by that? First thing, core practice, commit to it. So ask yourself, one of my favorite questions in my coaching stuff that I do, and this really my favorite question to ask myself is, what does my soul really need? Does it really need? What fuels me? And it's really simple for me. It's centering prayer every day. I also journal, and I need scripture. And I said need. I didn't say want. I said absolutely need. These are musts. And so I'm committed to those three things pretty much every day because that's my food. And if I do that every day, and most importantly, and I just know I work with a lot of pastors, the first thing that goes when you get really busy when you're a pastor is what I just said. It's the temptation continuously. Oh, I can just skip today. It's like, we can't skip that. And that, whether you're a pastor or a lay person, we need that spiritual food every single day. And during the busiest times, that's when we need it the most. There's that old joke about meditation. If you don't have time to meditate for 10 minutes, then you should meditate for 20 minutes, right? But it's the point there. It's like commit to that core practice. And then what do I mean by the one thing? All of us have a gift. All of us have music, a song that God's given us. And how I like to talk about this is, if you want to maintain that practice of God's presence, we commit to our spiritual formation practices. That's our core practice, but also sharing your gift every day or multiple times a week, depending on what it is. Like for me, I love to write. I like to teach. I'm a professor. I like to make videos and instruct and stuff. And so, that's what lights me up. And I know that's what God, put me on the planet to do. And I can tell spiritually when I'm not writing, when I'm not preparing materials to teach, when I'm not studying. And I discovered this when I was a dean, because for almost 10 years, I got drafted to be a dean and associate provost, which means I just attended meetings all day, had to deal with problems all day, you know, um, got behind the curtain. When you get behind the curtain, it's not always pretty, the things that you see, right? But what I discovered was this: if I'd go into my office and I go early and I do 20 minutes of centering prayer. And then I would just write for 30 minutes or make a video, 30 minutes, 45 minutes. I could spend the next 8 hours doing the things that really kind of drained me, and it was still a good day. And so I was able to maintain and practice God's presence even through those challenging things because I committed to my core practice and to doing my one thing that God put me on the earth to really do in a small dose. And so that those would be my reflections. Again, from my side, don't try to blast to the sky on an elevator. Build a staircase of practices. And then on a real practical level, pretty much every day, commit to doing your core practice of what your soul really needs and use your gifts. And you can experience, God's practice or presence and have that union again. Does that mean I'm always in union with God? Absolutely not. I would never want to give that testimony. I wish I could. But it helps me to at least live out the way that I believe God's called me to, at least a chunk of the time. And with that, getting grateful that everybody's here. And Rich, either give us a final word or you can lead us right into our time of centering prayer today as a group.
Sure. No, I mean, I think well said what you said. I don't have anything else to add to that. I think find what your soul needs and commit to the one thing, and then maybe sprinkle it in with a couple other things that help you.
Yeah.